Welcome to Feminist Question Time, brought to you by Women's Declaration International, the leading global organisation defending women's sex-based rights against the threats posed by gender identity ideology. There's more information on the website womensdeclaration.com, where you'll find our declaration on women's sex-based rights, which has been signed by 36,948 people from 160 countries and is supported by 517 organisations. We have many volunteer activists, including country contacts from every continent, engaged in defending women's rights. You can also become a member of WDI to help our work by volunteering or donating, and we'll put a link in for that. Today, I'm really pleased to say we have Linda Blade from Canada. She's going to tell us about the Canadian marches and what's happening in Canada. Then we have Cláudia Borralho from Portugal. She's going to give us a brief history of the gender critical movement in Portugal, strategies and struggles. We also have Henny Plat van Hooijdonk from the Netherlands, My Reasons to Fight for Women's Rights. That's her talk. And we have Dansky from the USA, a win for women and girls in San Francisco. So Linda Blade is a former national champion of Canada in track and field, heptathlon, with a PhD in kinesiology. For the past 26 years, she has run a private consulting business as sport performance professional coach in Edmonton, Alberta, working with athletes in over 15 sports, beginner to elite. Since 2014, she served as president of the board for Athletics Alberta, and I think that that's just come to an end. So that's 9-year term has just finished, which has been very involved in that at that level. And then recently, in a bid to increase public awareness of the threat posed by gender identity ideology, Linda partnered with journalist Barbara Kay to author a book titled Unsporting: How Trans Activism and Science Denial Are Destroying Sport. So we'll put a link to that book in the chat. So thank you so much, Linda, for coming to update us and give us news from Canada. And over to you.
Great event that happened in Canada on September 20th, Wednesday. Parents in Canada were encouraged to take their children out of school and march in the streets to protest the teaching of gender identity ideology in the schools. So it's called the 1 Million March for Children. And I hadn't even heard of this group until sometime in the late spring of this year. The next image shows some of the poster that they put out, and it's done under the organization is called Hands Off Our Kids. The mission, if you just look carefully, together we're united in solidarity, sending a message to all governments, hands off our kids. The movement embraces principles of human dignity, freedom and thought, and religious freedoms. Our mission includes safeguarding children's rights, and you can go down and see that they don't want their children indoctrinated with gender identity ideology. So it was very clear, the message is pro-family. A lot of different religious groups showed up, Christian, Muslim, Hindu, Jewish, but also many secular people and just general parents of school children. So the next slide. There was a woman and a man, they're both from the Islamic community. The Bahira Abdul Salam is an engineer, and they're both from Ontario. She's in Toronto. And the next slide shows Kamal El Sheikh is the gentleman that worked with her. And they're also, I think he also lives in Ontario. And I guess they had been working on this behind the scenes for quite a while, but the women's groups, we didn't even know this was happening. Anyway, it's good. And we all kind of join hands, many different organizations. So this is the map of Canada, and the blue dots show you all the different marches across the country, like how many. They started thinking they could get it done in 12 cities. And when I counted on their list, the actual number of cities that had marches that day was 102. So it just exploded. The need to speak out in Canada has clearly, it's come to a head, and they, they've really Everybody's really jumped into this. I'm going to show images. So we're going to start with images from Ontario, from various cities in Ontario as I speak. So the next slide shows the crowd of people who just want accountability. This is in Ottawa, by the way. This is our national capital, Ottawa. Massive, massive crowd. I think that was the biggest crowd. And very small crowds were counter protesting the parents, the rainbow, like the chevron flag. And of course, the media always said like they were the same numbers, but there's no way. There was this crowd, and there might have been a handful of like maybe 20 to 50 people always on the other side. I love some of these posters. Everybody was happily doing their posters. LGBT, stop transing the gay away. If genitals don't define gender, how does removing them affirm it? Great posters. I like this one. Never trust anyone who says don't tell your parents. Groomers. And this is in Queen's Park. This is in Toronto itself, near the main hall, the legislative building there. And this is, I think, where the organizers, one of them was there.
In Toronto, we also run a private school, and I also teach part-time as a professor.
And you can hear somebody saying, leave our kids alone. And that was a common chant across the country. So here's a capture of the president of the Labour Council, the local union in Ontario. They were caught. A meeting was leaked that they were contacting and directing Antifa to go against the protesters and the parents. So obviously the labor unions were not on our side. Right away they went to the other extreme, which was interesting. And then after the fact, this is our Bell Canada, one of our networks, the telephone company, is offering sessions in case people had hurt feelings after the marches, that they could get a healing session through the telephone company, which I found just I found this one of the most hilarious outcomes. Anyway, that was the situation in Ontario. And now let's move across the country to the next slide. So this one was in Saskatoon. I just wanted to show you an image from there. So I believe this was in Saskatoon. And one of our women who is on WDI Canada has now written a Substack about all of this. And if you look at the next slide, I believe it's on, yes. So she goes by Char Kate. And this is Saskatchewan, the storm, SOGI storm. SOGI, of course, as we know, mean in Canada, there's a curriculum called SOGI 123, sexual orientation and gender identity. And so you'll see a lot of the signs in all of these next few images saying no SOGI 123, because this is the actual curriculum coming from the Yogyakarta UN people through the Canadian bureaucracy, I suppose, education system. And so, yeah, this is the big one. So you might want to check out Char Kate over the next, and on genderdissent.com. Oh, and by the way, in this particular province, the premier, the premier of the province has put through a bill that will make it parents must be informed if a child wants to have a new name and new pronouns. And a judicial ruling just said they can't do that. And so this Premier Scott Moe, this is what Premier said: our government extremely dismayed by the judicial overreach. The best interest of the children is to ensure parents are included in their children's education, in their classrooms, and in the important decisions involving their children. This is the statement. And now, because of the blockage from the courts, because Canadian courts are all captured as well, this premier is going to go to almost taking this to a constitutional crisis. The premier is going to use the notwithstanding clause to override the judge. And this is the most extreme thing a premier can do. To invoke the notwithstanding clause means that he sees it that he can override a judicial ruling, and of course all the woke, or I guess normal legacy mainstream news outlets are saying that this is, there should be no reason why the premier should do this, and this is unnecessarily overreaching with the Constitution and blah, blah, blah. But you can see how now even some leaders in this country are starting to get the idea and then realize what's going on. And we're heading into a couple years of really interesting conflict. So let's go on to my area of the country, which is in Alberta. And I'm in one of the more northern, well, no, where the blue dot is, I guess, in the central part of the province. We have a massive part of the province is far north. So the blue dot at the very top of this is where the oil sands are. This is Calgary. So the first one is in the city of Calgary, which is to the south of me. And then the next one, I believe, is the Edmonton crowd. And let the video run. You'll see their signs. These are just great people, normal people.
My kids, my choice!
My kids, my choice!
Cameras on the teachers!
And there I am, waving my flag. So it was fantastic. And by the way, that group that was walking through, the crowd was so big, it took 10 minutes for all of them to walk through. So that was just a small clip of a 10-minute, I think it must have been at least 5,000 to 10,000 people. I mean, just walking and walking past. So here's the small counter-protest crowd. And imagine that the media was saying the crowds were the same size. It's quite a joke. And I want you to notice that building behind, okay, you see the chevron flag, the progress flag, and then you see the title on that building is the Alberta Teachers Association. So the Teachers Association was literally saying they were on the side of the counter protest. And that big flag was on their parking lot, their parkade for the Teachers Association. They put up the big flag. The big protest was opposite side of the street. So it was a big middle finger to the parents. And then something happened. I think a couple guys from the parents' protest got over to that parkade and ripped the flag down. Somehow they got that flag off there. So it was kind of turned into a game of steal the flag. And now I want you to see the next image. So now the Edmonton police are looking for these two guys who took the flag down, and they're being accused of, these are hateful people that they have to find. They have to find these two guys. Anyway, it's just so silly. The whole thing is silly. So now we go over to the West Coast, and we have images from Vancouver and Victoria. Megan Murphy was in the one at the furthest west. So Megan Murphy was showing, even in the lead up on the day before, you'll see on the September 19th, she was showing emails from BC Human Rights Commissioner saying that this thing was hateful, that there's anti-trans, denying the existence of trans and gender diverse people. So they were already starting to try to tell the public that be careful, there's a bunch of hateful marches coming up. And this is, again, just sight and sound. Vancouver, I believe this was Vancouver. Everything was peaceful until it got to Megan Murphy in Victoria.
Sexist nonsense ideology that claims the impossible. That individuals can change sex through self-declaration. That claims it is possible to be born in the wrong body. That says if a girl or woman sees a man in their change room and that man...
the police let trans activists and Antifa invade the parents and the crowd where Megan Murphy was speaking. And then the police forced the protesters to the parents' side, Megan's mic, to be shut off because they said that it wasn't going to be safe anymore. So suddenly they were worried about safety after they let all of these Antifa people in and caused, you know, a bit of a confrontation physically. So everything across Canada was peaceful until that moment. We almost made it. It was the farthest, you know, just before the Pacific Ocean, and all of a sudden all hell broke loose. Of course, the local University of Victoria, where Megan was speaking there, was talking again about, some of you are aware, protests against trans in schools were taking place against cities across Canada. Oh, I guess this was in the preamble as well. And it was hate-fueled movements. It's always hate-fueled movements. And then our Prime Minister weighs in, our lovely Justin Trudeau. Let me make one thing very clear. Transphobia, homophobia, and biphobia have no place in this country. We strongly condemn this hate and its manifestations, and we stand united in support of blah, 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 Canadians across the country, and you are valid and you are valued. And then finally, after a day or two, it took a while, the leader of the opposition, which is the Conservative leader, came back. Justin Trudeau always divides to distract from all he has broken. This time he is demonizing concerned parents. Parents should be the final authority on the values and lessons that are taught to children. Trudeau should butt out and let parents raise their kids. So we now see the little bit of, you know, now there's opposition. The Conservative government was never stopping all this until this year. So this is very good news that there's gonna, like, some parties at least are standing up, starting to anyway. This is the last slide, and it's just big hurrah and thank you to everybody. And it was so successful. There's going to be another march on, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, October 23. So this is only beginning. It's not stopping. And at the Abbotsford School Board, I think 2 nights ago, there were about 500 parents trying to stop the school board from making a rule about enforcing SOGI 123. And the school board barely squeaked out a win, and the parents erupted, and the police had to escort the board members out. I think Canadian parents, it's safe to say, I think the cat is out of the bag, as we say in English. You can't put it back in the bag. I think this is really the moment of big change in Canada, I hope. It's going to take, there's so much damage has been done, so many rules and laws and legislation. It's probably going to take us a decade to unravel everything. But I'm very hopeful. I think this is the turning point, at least it feels like it. So thank you for letting me share.
Second speaker is Cláudia Borralho from Portugal. She's going to give a brief history of gender critical movements in Portugal. So Cláudia, welcome. I'll introduce you. So Cláudia became a more or less known person in the Portuguese lesbian community due to her projects. One of the most important most known was called Leswork, which was a lesbian network, 2009 to 17, with more than 1,000 women in Portugal who started promoting dedicated events like dinners, picnics, paintball games, speed datings, annual camping and parties. Only the parties were open to everyone. Liberfem was another party, but for women only. A few years ago, Cláudia was focused on gender critical movement in Portugal, and more than 1 year ago created Gender Critical Lesbians. Cláudia's aim is to help put together people who want to share creative and peaceful ideas to clean the mess and avoid more damages that gender ideology has been creating in our lives. She realizes we need to cultivate more critical thinking, not only about this damaging ideology. So we're really grateful that you're here, Cláudia. And
I believe that to understand the Portuguese situation, it's important to give some context about feminism itself, and the lesbian and gay movements in Portugal that appeared very late comparing to most of your countries. Well, we need to be aware that we had a dictatorship during almost 50 years, and homosexuals were persecuted, and the feminists were focused in dealing with the dictatorship. So women were quite important, and their struggles were quite, how can I say, directed to this problem we were dealing with. So just to give you some context, Portugal is this really small thing we can see here in the corner of Europe. It's a very small country. We are comparing ourselves all the time with Spain, despite our governments having they are inspired also by countries like USA, Canada, also related to this issue of gender ideology, and Spain. We are comparing ourselves all the time with Spain, our only neighbor. So what happens to Spain sooner or later might happen in Portugal too. That is something to be worried about. Back to the future, just to give you some context. I could not find many stats from the beginning of last century. I wanted to compare illiteracy in Portugal. In the beginning of the century, very, very few people had access to schools. Women having access to education were a clear minority from the elite. Also, very few people were able to read or write in Portuguese, and much less in English or French. We had, just to give you some history background, we had the monarchy was replaced by a republic in 1910. Then there were some issues with two political parties fighting against each other. So the Portuguese situation in the 20s were very, very complicated, and it turned in a military coup in 1926 that originated what we call Estado Novo. So from this period, 1926 till 74, it's the period we consider the dictatorship in Portugal, and it was very hard for most Portuguese people who didn't comply with what was happening. We need to be aware that Portugal was not the only dictatorship at the time, right? Because other countries were suffering from the same. But our situation is a bit particular for many reasons. Talking about the feminist movement, there were some feminist organizations. For you to have an idea, our first feminist congress was in 1924, the second one in 1928, and the third one recently in 2008. I was there too in 2008, and I didn't perceive any anything less consensual in the Portuguese feminist movement at the time. Maybe I was not aware of it, but well, in the first feminist congresses, women were claiming for the right to vote, to access education, equality, freedom of thinking, to have access to professions like judge, diplomat, military, or police. Also, it was a hard situation because in order to work, travel abroad, or open a bank account, women needed an official document with her husband's permission. So it was the case of my grandmother also. In the late 60s, there was this famous writers which shared the name Maria Velho da Costa, Maria Teresa Horta, and Maria Isabel Barreno. Teresa Horta is the only one who is alive nowadays. I'm not sure now, but I think in 72, no, sorry. So one of them was being harassed for a book, I believe a book of poems she wrote. And she was commenting with her friends about the situation, about the harassment. And one of them came up with the idea, wow, if one woman can make such damage, can you imagine how it would be if we would do something together? So they created this book. I have the last edition, Novas Cartas Portuguesas. It means something like the new Portuguese letters. Were criticizing many things like the war, because Portuguese were at war with their ex-colonies. They were talking about rape, about pedophilia, about the situation of women in Portugal. So it was it is a collection of texts and poems and essays. So it's a collection of many things, and it is not signed, so nobody knows exactly which one of them wrote what. At the time, the strategy of the government was not properly censored in the beginning. They would allow some books to be published in order to punish the editors and the authors. So they were allowed to publish the book so they could persecute people who bought it, the writers and the editors. It's also important to refer that there is a very important book called Mulheres da Minha Terra, Women from My Country, from Maria Lamas, who has a huge collection. Unfortunately, I didn't put the image here. Who has a huge collection of women working in the fields, working in the factories. So basically, she was showing, because she traveled around all the country and also the Portuguese islands, Madeira and Açores, to make this very interesting document that is now a book. It used to be fascículos, to tell about women's life. So this was a very brave book, and they managed to pass the book to some of their friends who had contact with feminists abroad, who organized many marches and actions in solidarity with the three Marias. So these images, some of them are from Holland. Also, we have New York and what was the other? Los Angeles. So as you can see, they were talking about the new Portuguese letters, the book, the Three Marias, and about the Portuguese situation. The funny fact is that in Portugal, nobody knew about it because there was the censor and nothing was being published in the newspapers. But the feminists abroad knew about it, and so the international community started exposing the situation in Portugal. Basically, they escaped from the trial because of the revolution we call Carnation Revolution in 1974. There is a picture, unfortunately, I could not find it anymore. There is a picture of the feminists from Holland on the rooftop of the Portuguese embassy in Hague with, como se diz faixa, with I'm sorry, I forgot the English word, faixa, saying free the Three Marias. This is a very interesting picture. Unfortunately, I could not find it anymore. We have very few, I also bought that book. We have very few documents who talk about homosexuality during this period. It is not very well documented. This book is one of the few. It was launched in 2010. And it is being criticized because she's speaking about people who are already dead and cannot confirm their homosexuality. So basically, the author did some interviews to people who knew how was it, and most of the names who are exposed on the book are from people who died already. So, but anyway, this is a very interesting document that exposes some of the situations of most homosexual people. It's important to notice that the Portuguese Penal Code allowed to punish persons caught in homosexual acts, and only in 1982 it was decriminalized. It's also interesting that during this period appeared our first gay disco. So the first Portuguese gay disco is from early 80s. Since homosexuality by the time was considered a mental disorder, homosexuals were frequently locked in what we call mitra, and later they started being locked in psychiatric hospitals where they used to receive electroshocks. They also could be condemned to forced labor or restrictions to have a profession. Only in 1986, with our integration in European Union, homosexuality stopped officially to be considered a mental disease. Only in late 90s, our first gay and lesbians charities were founded, as well as the first edition of the Lisbon Gay and Lesbian Film Festival. It is the oldest movie festival in Lisbon. We have many festivals now, the French festival, the German festival, the independent festival, but this is the oldest one. It is today is the last day of the festival. It is occurring now, and I believe it is in the 26th edition. Curiously, the Lisbon Gay and Lesbian Film Festival changed its name in 2007 to Lisbon Queer Festival. So this is a very interesting, como se diz, dica. So this was a tip that something was changing in 2007. But generally speaking, it was not much. By the end of the 90s, we also, the Gay and Lesbian Association, start the street celebrations we call Arraial. Also by this time appeared the first gay hotel, the first gay Portuguese magazine, and the first gay website. So everything at the same period. In 2000, we had our first gay pride march, only in 2000. And in 2009, I have launched Leswork, the first lesbian social network dedicated to lesbians, with which we organized many events for lesbians till 2014. I remember some people were trying to convince me to create an association to transform Leswork in something official, but I never wanted to, and I'm really glad I didn't. When Leswork disappeared, we were more than 1,000 girls, and it's sad to know that many of these girls claim to be non-binary, use strange pronouns, and some others started making mastectomies, taking cross-sex hormones, and identifying as men. It's interesting, some important dates. In 2010, Portugal was the 8th country to recognize same-sex marriages. What is happening in Portugal is that our governments, in realizing that we were too late in the lesbian and gay recognition of their rights to have their unions officially recognized and all this stuff, they started to compete with other countries to check who will be the first ones to approve certain laws and rights and things sold as rights. 2010, the 8th country recognizing same-sex marriages. In 2011, it appeared the first law regarding gender recognition. Nobody was very aware about what was it really. In 2016, artificial insemination also for single women and lesbians. And in 2018, the self-ID law, who allows to change birth certificates. Also during these years, schools started teaching something called Educação para a Cidadania, which means something like education for citizenship. This was kind of made in most Portuguese people back. I believe it was during holidays, during vacation times. It was very fast. There was no any discussion in the Portuguese community. So most people were kind of caught by surprise. Nowadays, this is bringing some huge discussions about the contents of this of Educação para a Cidadania, when it turns to distort biology, history, and also language, and promote what we generally called gender ideology. It is very hard to precise exactly when it is started to be absorbed by the academy, the Portuguese academy, and being spread through all society. This was a very gradual process, and we were not being aware of this.
We're going to now hear from Henny Plat van Hooijdonk from the Netherlands. Henny's talk is called My Reasons to Fight for Women's Rights, and Henny says her mum and the mum of her mother both fought for female sex-based rights, safety, etc. I used to think those were safe in the Netherlands, and I always did stand for women with other countries, but has now found out that this is under attack by misogynistic, patriarchal new religion. Henny had to fight back. So thank you so much, Henny, and over to you.
My mom and my grandmother were active in the fight for more rights for women. So I was taught from a very young age that the generations before me had fought for what we had. And until a couple of years ago, I always thought, well, that's okay. They've delivered that fight, and now we can continue make the world a little bit a better place. I was taught very young, you should always, as a woman, never be dependent, be independent, go study, go find your own job, make your own living, etc. And when I was younger, I was very active in the labor youth organizations, student unions, Dutch peace organizations, all those. Well, always had something like, you have to make the world a little bit a better place. Like Joe, I studied to become a teacher, social sciences and history, but I never ended up before a classroom because I found another job. I work for one of the biggest Dutch unions in the Netherlands, and through my work, I found out women in other parts of the world, countries like India, etc. Well, they deserved, they have less rights, they have less safety, etc. than men. And we are working through, amongst others, international responsible business conduct to make the world a little bit better for everyone. And well, then I think it was about 2 years ago, I first found out in the Netherlands there was a sports club for women. And the man demanded access because he said he felt like a woman. And I had something like, well, this is funny, we fought for special places for women. What's happening over here? This must be some sort of exception. And then I started to read more. I've read the books by Kathleen Stock and by others. And I had something like, okay, everything my mom and my grandmother fought for is in danger, and it's in danger by a new sort of religion, because, like I said, I'm your typical really left-sided socialist, atheist, pacifist, activist, whatever you call it, kind of woman, the kind they're always talking about, the typical ladies from the left. Okay, that's me. And then I had something like, okay, this is like some sort of religion, and they want me to believe that I have to give up our sex-based rights because a man wants me to share his belief. I don't believe I'm going to do that. And that's when I had something like, okay, this can't be happening. I have to find out more, and I have to somehow fight back. And that fighting back isn't always easy, I'm following a lot of the people over here on X, on Twitter, like Linda and Joe and Cara and everybody. And I had something like, okay, this means I can't stay silent. So that's why I signed the pledge, because there is still a huge wage gap in the Netherlands and in all kinds of countries all over Europe. We are fighting for women and girls in developed countries to have safe access to toilets, to safety, etc. And over here, we are expected to hand over those safe places on a silver platter to any man who says he's a woman? Don't think so. Solidarity is very important to me. And then I'm thinking, okay, I've got it fixed. I'm not going to be immediately threatened by this, but I have younger girls in my family. I have nieces. I have a granddaughter. I don't want them to share a locker room with someone like Will Thomas, if that ever was going to happening. And that's why I signed the pledge, and that's why I signed the declaration. In the Netherlands, we are going to have elections coming November. And together with some other, women from the political left who are also still members of political parties, we are trying everything we can to at least show that it's not just conservative, religious women who are fighting against all those poor trans women who are really women and who we should be kind to. No, women from the left are fighting for everything our moms and our grandmothers and our sisters fought for, and we are not going to hand it over. We are not going to give it away. And with a lot of us, we are already making clear to Dutch politicians, following the example from the UK, if you say a woman can have a penis, we are not going to trust anything else you are saying, because if you are lying about that, you're also going to be lying about the economy, about the environment, about pensions, about healthcare, because someone who is blatantly lying, how can you trust them? Never. And that's why I signed the declaration. And like Joe said, and I wrote it down, I see transgenderism as a misogynistic, colonizing, patriarchal, men's privilege movement. And I think all women together should stand in solidarity. And not just for us, not for our generation, but for the generations that are coming after us, our nieces, our daughters, our granddaughters, so that they can have the same safe sex-based rights, spaces, sports I had when I was growing up. And they can kiss that silver platter with the tie around it, with our rights on it handed over to them. They can kiss that goodbye, and that's a pledge I'm really making.
We're going to go on to our final speaker, who's Cara Dansky. So Cara Dansky is from the USA. She is a lawyer and president of the US chapter of WDI, Women's Declaration International. She previously served on the board of Women's Liberation Front, WOLF, from 2016 to 2020. And the title of Cara's talk today is A Win for Women and Girls in San Francisco. Welcome, Cara.
I want to say San Francisco was a huge win for women and girls. The US chapter had our first convention in Washington, D.C. last September, and we decided to bring our message to the West Coast. And so we went to San Francisco. And leading up to the convention, we worked very hard to develop a really positive, friendly, collegial relationship with the hotel where we were planning to have our convention. And they really liked us. They liked working with us a lot. And so a couple of weeks before the convention, we heard from them that they were starting to get email messages and phone calls and complaints about us. They were getting complaints from people who were saying that we were a bunch of fascist bigots and that we were a hate group. And they were very curious about this, and they wanted to talk with us about it. And so we had very candid conversations with them, and we explained that we are about women's sex-based rights. And they were kind of shocked that people were calling us a hate group. And so we spent a few days being very terrified that they were going to cancel us, because as many of us know, all around the world, when women have gatherings to talk about our sex-based rights, it's par for the course for venues to cancel us. And so we started scrambling and thinking, we're going to need a backup plan. And what are we going to do when women have booked flights and hotel rooms? And how are we going to handle this? And as the days went on, it became clear that they actually loved us and they had no intention of canceling it. And the hotel staff, our main point of contact, put us in touch with the head of security. And Megan Rose, our vice president, and I had multiple conversations with the head of security, and he loved us. And it just became clear that they weren't going to cancel us. They were going to be there for us. They wanted to support us. They love our message. And the head of security was planning to have security guards there the whole time to make sure we were safe. And that's what they said over and over again. Our priority is to make sure you have a positive meeting and that all of your attendees stay safe. And he even went so far as to say, my goal is to have a female security officer in every meeting room throughout your convention, which was fascinating because not only was that a really good idea, but it also made it very clear that he understood our message. Now, that ended up not happening because it wasn't possible for staffing reasons. But the fact that that was his intention told us right off the bat that they were with us. So that was really, really good. So a few highlights. We had just over 100 women attend from all across the US, and I'm happy to say we had some guests from Germany. WDI Germany was there, and we were very happy to have them. Our presentation topics included a wide variety, including reproductive technology, women in academia, intersectionality, women joining forces across racial and ethnic and religious differences. We talked about lesbians and lesbians' role in the women's liberation movement. We talked about lesbian-only spaces. We had breakout sessions on desisted women and detransitioned women. We had Laura Becker, who is herself a detransitioner. She came to give a breakout session. So we covered a wide variety of topics, and it was really great. We got very positive feedback. Women just had a really good time. I'm sorry to say that few of the sessions were able to be recorded. We did have some sessions recorded, and we hope to be getting those out as soon as possible. But we had some challenges related to our audio visual, and so we weren't able to record all the sessions. So I'm sorry about that. So what happened was we had a very successful discussion on Friday evening of the convention. We talked about radical feminist tactics. Leah Keith from Wolf was there to talk about the strategy of nonviolent direct action. Lauren Levy was there to talk about consciousness raising in the second wave and how we might benefit from consciousness raising in our movement today. I gave a talk about legislative and legal advocacy in the women's liberation movement, and it was very peaceful and fine and positive. And then Saturday morning, and we knew there was a planned protest on Saturday morning, so we were ready for it. The hotel, I would say, was somewhat ready for it. They had their security on high alert. And at some point in the mid-morning, the protesters showed up. And for a while, they seemed to manage to keep themselves calm. And they seemed to want to portray themselves as the peaceful civil rights good guys against the mean, hateful bigots, which was us. And so they were able to control themselves for a period of time. But then Trantifa showed up in all its glory. And what they did was essentially seek to disrupt and absolutely terrorize our meeting. They made scenes outside, and we'll have a few clips of what they were doing outside. One guy brought a hammer to the protest and actually took the hammer to the hotel's main sign outside and vandalized it. The hotel manager, who was very much on our side, he did what he thought he was doing, which was his job, to go out and prevent vandalism to his own hotel property. And when he did that, someone punched him in the face. The police were able to arrest the guy who took a hammer to the sign and vandalized the sign. I don't think the man who punched the hotel manager was ever arrested. Eventually, they actually stormed the hotel, and they were able to get into the hotel, and they tried to come directly to our meeting. And they used both the main entrance and some alternative entrances to get into the hotel, and security was fantastic about repelling them. And eventually, security had to stand at the main entrance to the hotel in order to let in legitimate hotel guests while repelling the protesters. And so we really think that our opponents peak transed all of the hotel staff, all of the hotel security, and all of the members of the public who were just there to be legitimate hotel guests. They made such jerks of themselves that they showed themselves exactly for who they are. And initially, hotel security had 2 members of the San Francisco Police Department on hand, but they eventually had to bring in more, like, I think there were around 10 or 12. The scene outside for most of Saturday. As I said, several of them tried to infiltrate the hotel, and security was able to keep them out. They stayed late into the night. I don't know how late. I went to bed. But the point here is that we just carried on with our meeting. We just ignored them. We let security do their job, and the police, and we just carried on talking. And we had amazing, amazing conversations. Our purpose was not to engage with the protesters at all. And so we think they did a very fine job of peak transing pretty much everyone in the vicinity. Okay, so then on Sunday, we carried on with our meeting in the morning, and it ended just around lunchtime on Sunday, and we proceeded to have a very peaceful training session in the tactic of nonviolent direct action to prepare for the action on Monday, which I'll explain in a minute. But then one of the protesters from Saturday managed to actually check himself into the hotel as a guest. This lovely man was part of the protest on Saturday. I think this is in the evening on Saturday at some point. And I don't know who got that photo of him, but someone did. And he was one of the men, protesting our meeting. And this guy checked himself into the hotel on Sunday. So it's hard to see, but so it's unmistakably the same guy. He has long blue hair, and he was wearing a black dress. And we saw him walking around the hotel. He mostly just wandered around the hotel. Other than in this moment, this is when he came right to the outside of our main meeting room. And we don't know what he was planning to do, but we immediately got security involved. And the man behind him is security, taking him out of the area outside of our meeting room. So at that point, he managed to behave himself and not terrorize us, but he did wander around the hotel. And he had friends. There were a couple of other men in dresses, and they just wandered around the hotel. And the issue was not that they were attacking us. They weren't, but it was scary because we had no way of knowing what room or rooms they were in, what floor they were on. So then those of us who stuck around for Sunday evening adopted a policy of just not being alone in the hotel. Many of us didn't have much to worry about because most of us were indistinguishable from ordinary hotel guests. And we didn't think that these guys would go so far as to just start randomly punching legitimate hotel guests, although who knows, they might have gone that far. But some of us did have something to worry about. And I frankly was terrified that if any of these guys were on the floor where I was staying, I didn't want to be in the empty hallway with them because I don't think that they would have hesitated to punch me. I had the same concern for Lear Keith. These guys know us by name. Every time they follow us around the country, attacking us at our events, they always name me and Lear, and they often put photos of us up on their protest materials. So I was really legit terrified of this guy. But it was fine. We had a buddy system, and we didn't let anyone be on any of the floors alone. And it was fine. And then for reasons we don't know, he was escorted out of the hotel Monday morning. And it was pretty funny because I went to check out and I saw him standing at the hotel guest, seemingly arguing with the front desk. And I have no idea what they were arguing about. I don't know if he did something to justify them kicking him out of the hotel. I don't know if he just didn't want to pay his bill. I have no idea. But one of us, a woman named Lauren, saw security escorting him out of the hotel Monday morning, which was great. And then he showed up at our Monday action. So I just want to say quickly about our Monday action. We were at City Hall to do a nonviolent direct action. We stood there. We all gave speeches in support of lesbians in particular. And the police were very effective. And the same protesters showed up to protest our City Hall action. And the next clip I just want to show quickly is several clips that a woman named Lauren put together specifically of me speaking. And I was doing what I was doing very deliberately to make a point, which I think you'll be able to see. So
will use the liberal state to protect themselves.
Hello, San Francisco! We are so happy to be here, to stand up for lesbians. I'm so happy to be here. I'm Dansky. I'm the president of the U.S. chapter of Women's Declaration International. We are an international organization that stands for the sex-based rights of women and girls, including lesbians, and we are so happy to be in San Francisco on this beautiful day to stand up for the rights of lesbian women and girls.
No fascist USA! No terror! No radiation hatred! What do we want? Fascist!
So I just want to point out, we are here giving speeches. We are very calm, we are very happy, and these people are screaming at us like the lunatics that they are. Teresa,
That's why you're a fucking fascist!
about rape culture. These people could not be more proud to support rape culture right now.
Fucking victim!
Okay.
You couldn't be a bigger fucking victim!
Right, we're at a lesbian event.
No, I just wanted to let them show themselves for who they are once again. We were there to stand up for lesbians and for women and girls, and they called us fascists. So I think we did a pretty good job of peak transing San Francisco. So the reason we do our actions in the way that we do, we try to look uniform. We have some very beautiful banners. And we choose this tactic very deliberately. We understand that we're putting ourselves in danger. We do. We understand that. And that is not for everyone. But we're going to keep doing it. There will be more actions. Our next one is in Portland, Oregon on November 19th. And I just want to convey that the energy and joy and hopefulness were palpable. And women who attended reported that to us. Everyone who attended both the convention and the action felt like it was a really, really positive experience. So, yeah, we're declaring San Francisco a win for women and girls, including lesbians.
Thanks very much for inviting us along today, Jo, because we're getting really excited about the book now. It's being published on the 10th of October, and there will be both a digital copy and a print copy. And I've actually got some proofs. So there's only 3 copies of this in existence at the moment, but you can see one of them here. And it's a really beautifully produced book, I think. It's, the people who've been working on it have just done the most amazing job. So many thanks to all of them. To tell you a little bit about the book, it's in 2 parts. So the first part is a series of short chapters, essays, from about 28 different women all around the world. And it covers an enormous range of issues. Well, just we summed some of them up, for example, on the back cover. So the writers come from not just all continents, but also from all walks of life, and discuss the personal and professional impact that gender identity ideology is having in their countries. And the topics range from myth-busting academics to an Angolan lesbian, from a Canadian ex-prisoner to the mother of a gender dysphoric teenager. The articles cover grassroots resistance in Japan, women's spirituality, reproductive exploitation in South America, and just a whole load more as well. And there's just an incredible range of voices being heard there. And it's great that we do have writers who range from first-time writers to performance poets to senior academics, and just all across the board. And if you were one of the people that's contributed to that, then many thanks, because it's come together as a really brilliant overall piece of work. It's the first book ever that covers the question of gender identity ideology from an international perspective. So it's very important in that respect, I think. The second part of the book is a series of standardized reports from 35 different countries. We, as many of you watching will have contributed to these as well. We did a questionnaire and asked country contacts to complete it, and from that we've written standardized country reports, and they tell a tale of woe really for women's rights across the board. We'd rather hoped to find at least one country which we could all dream of moving to, where women weren't subjected to gender identity ideology and had other things such as reproductive rights. But it seems that such a country doesn't exist, or certainly we haven't found it yet. So some of the countries that we report on in the country reports are countries which gender identity ideology hasn't yet made a big impact on, but they do tend still to have terrible rights for women in those countries, particularly in relation to reproductive rights and equality and discrimination. So I think it's important that we look at that whole range of issues that affect women. The book is getting some fantastic reviews, and if you don't mind, I'm going to take a minute or two to read some of them to you, or bits of some of them to you, because I think it's important what other people have to say as well. So the Brazilian author Anne Rami says that the book is highly effective in exposing how financiers, governments, academia, the media and the press have collaborated in the mass implementation of the neoliberal ideals represented by the trans-activist agenda. Secondly, Renata Klein from Spinifex Press, who's written a really lovely review for us. And again, just some extracts from it.
She says, one after the other, the articles report eerily similar mechanisms, changes in law from sex to gender, and the introduction of self-ID take place without fanfare and without public discussion. Women's Declaration International and their country contacts must be congratulated for publishing Women's Rights Gender Wrongs. It is a cohesive and timely volume which will contribute to educating people. Give this book to your MP, your neighbour, your parents, and urge them not to sell out women and girls to delusionary trans-speak. And finally, from Kathleen Stock, who says, this is a stunning piece of work, providing a meticulously researched, jaw-dropping snapshot of the global effects of gender identity ideology on women's rights. This kind of work could not have been done in universities, but is no less rigorous for that. Indeed, its quality only underlines that the very best work in uncovering the parlous state of women's rights internationally is happening outside academia. So if you've contributed to the book, that's the that's the impact that you're having on people who really know just how important it is, the work that you've done. So again, thank you all for that. We will be inviting many of the contributors to come on FQT over the next few weeks and months and talk about their individual contributions. So I'm not going to cover them in any detail just now. But what I would like to do is to talk a little bit about promotion, because it's really important that everybody involved in WDI helps with promotion as much as possible. We will be tweeting about it, probably starting in a week or so's time. We'll be issuing a series of tweets, and we'd really hope that everybody who can retweets them or quote tweets them or something and make some comments yourself, and also publishes them or reposts them in other social media as widely as possible. Once it's published, or once we have the details, we will be including in the tweets links where you can buy the book, either the hard copy or the digital version. The digital version we'll be buying directly from WDI, I hope, and that will be the same obviously everywhere in the world. But the printed copies, it's best if you buy them, it's cheapest for you if you buy them from an outlet that's local to you. So although we will be tweeting out where you can get them if you live in Europe or the UK, if you live somewhere else, we will ask if you could maybe try and find a better source for a better local booksellers and replace that in the tweet. So that's something that everybody could help with, I think. And I think that's really all I want to say. We will be sending out a few more emails as well with extra information as we get it. And thanks very much again, Joe, for having us along.